I want to extend to all of you a warm welcome, also to those connected with us online, streaming. A video of this program will be put on our YouTube channel. I want to welcome especially Cardinal Arthur Roach, the prefect of the Dicastery for Divine Liturgy and the Discipline of Sacraments. We are very happy and honored to have you here, Archbishop Roach. Then Abbot Primate Gregory Polan, also the Grand Chancellor of our university, and Abbot Donato Ogliari, Abbot of St. Paul outside the walls, and all of you who came here today. The Pontificio Ateneo Sant'Anselmo has conferred to Michael Casey an honorary doctorate because we believe that his studies on monasticism are most notable. That was 2 years ago, on the eve of his 80th birthday. Even though he has miraculously not become younger since then, Father Michael has come again from the other side of the globe to teach here in the monastic formators program during the last few days, give this public lecture now, and offer an intensive course as a guest professor at our university starting tomorrow. So we really put him to work here. Perhaps we can get a clue why Michael Casey has retained a youthful spirit from the vital role that reading plays in his own life and in his published works. And this apparently brings creative satisfaction and joy, reading and studying. And so we are looking forward to hearing his talk, The Joy of Random Study. Father Michael, welcome at Sant'Anselmo.
Thank you, and thank you for coming. I asked the question of my computer, how many students are there in Rome? And the answer came back, 268,000. And I asked another question, how many students in Rome study? And no response was forthcoming. This seems to indicate a divergence between the noun and the verb, suggesting perhaps that somehow it's possible to be a student without studying. This makes no sense at all in the context of the history and etymology of the word study. The Proto-Indo-European root stud, from which the Latin studere derives, seems to indicate more than an external activity. It evokes an attitude of zeal, dedication, eagerness that underlies a person's application to a task or the pursuit of the goal. There is a certain passion involved. As Cicero noted, study, studium, is the assiduous occupation of the mind, vehemently applied to something with great pleasure. Assiduous, vehement, pleasurable. Perhaps that's why no answer was given to the query about how many students study. How is it possible to be a student without studying? A student in the etymological sense is an enthusiast, not a drudge. In contemporary English usage, however, a student is a learner or an apprentice, to be distinguished from one who has mastered the art or has become a practitioner or a teacher. Not yet the real thing. Most of us would be reluctant to be operated on by a student doctor. A student exists in a transitional state between ignorance and expertise. How far along that particular spectrum students are judged to be depends on one's point of observation. Their doting grandparents may regard them as extraordinarily knowledgeable, but their exam results may reveal something rather less spectacular. For students, there's always an element of discontent due to the fact that they are not yet where they want to be. What is being asked of them in the present is different from what they hope to be doing in the future. As a result, enthusiasm wanes. They may slacken in the intensity of their efforts, perhaps exaggerating in their own estimation the progress they have made, perhaps doubting the relevance of the exercises that they have been assigned. Study may seem more like a chore than a delight. When they achieve their desired goal, study will cease. In contrast to this everyday usage, I like to envisage a distinctive kind of study that is the embodiment of the detached and disinterested desire to know, to lapse into Lonerganism. The learned Jesuit was following the tradition to which many ancient philosophers gave voice when they insisted that knowledge is the first object to which we are attracted after the supply of our physical needs. As Cicero wrote, "This pertains most of all to human nature, for we are all of us drawn to the pursuit of knowledge and science in which we consider it excellent to excel, whereas to be mistaken, to err, to be ignorant, or to be deceived is both an evil and a disgrace." And the reason for this is that human nature is endowed with an inherent inclination towards knowledge. Cicero continues, "The search after truth and its eager pursuit are proper to the human being. And so when we are free from the demands of business and cares, we are eager to see, to hear, to learn something new, and we esteem a desire to know the secret wonder of things as indispensable to a happy life. Thus we come to understand that what is true, simple, and genuine appeals most strongly to human nature. To speak of knowledge as detached and disinterested is to underline its desirable gratuitousness. There is in such pure application of the mind no ulterior motive, no immediate purpose beyond itself. There is an ultimate goal, a telos, but this corresponds to the final destination of human life itself. It is this eros of the mind, as Lonergan terms it, that generates in us both a yearning for the absolute and a kind of instinctive guidance in the task of moving towards it. No doubt this is to endow study with a degree of existential seriousness that goes beyond the merely education or the purely functional. It is an activity that helps us to become more fully human. Even while this non-utilitarian investment of time in study is becoming a lifetime habit, disparate glimmerings of who I am and who I am meant to become begin to sparkle on the surface of consciousness. It's more than the acquisition of knowledge about the objective world. It is also a burgeoning awareness of my own subjective identity. Such study becomes a means by which I am imprinted with my own particular identity. It facilitates the gradual emergence of the one that I will be for all eternity. This is not to say that nothing of the sort occurs during more formalized educational activity. In fact, it's often these flashes of insight that provide motivation for the hours spent in gathering and synthesizing the work of others. In the midst of our toil or in a moment of leisure, a window opens and we intuit something of the vast expanse that was hitherto beyond our sight. The purity of intelligible truth suddenly emerges from within the mundane realities which we had been occupied in juggling. I do not doubt that this happens sometimes, but the very unexpectedness of such eureka moments may well be an indication of some deficiency in our general methodology or some narrowness in our purview. If, as I have been suggesting, random study is a valuable and maybe integral component of our humanization, it follows that it's likely to become impaired to the extent that it is under the control of the ego. To be changed by listening to the universe demands that the ego be silenced. The dynamic of the ego is essentially conservative and defensive. It makes use of the default mode network of the brain to resist change, to give exaggerated respect to routine, and to ensure continuity. It does not give free play to intelligent inquiry, lest questions are asked whose answers may possibly pose a threat to the status quo. Controlled research can never be entirely trusted, since there is no guarantee that what has been excluded from the scope of disciplined investigation is not relevant to its findings. Authentic study involves letting go. Dare I say that it demands a certain measure of playfulness. The purity of intention that is the foundation for mind-blowing insight demands that we expose ourselves to reality or to texts that speak of reality in a spirit of substantial openness, free from both ambition and apprehension. The ambience that authentic study demands is one of leisure. I'm sure I don't have to remind you that the Greek root of the words scholar and school is precisely schole, leisure. We're not speaking here of leisure as mindless disengagement, recreational activity, entertainment, or idleness. Leisure is not an escape, but a discovery. It's not listless passivity, but an openness to energetic involvement. It's more properly understood as a state which liberates that which is most deeply personal and thus opens avenues to reality that are otherwise blocked. Josef Pieper stated this clearly in his highly respected study, Leisure, the Basis of Culture. He wrote, "Leisure is a form of silence, which is the prerequisite of the apprehension of reality. Leisure is a receptive attitude of mind, a contemplative attitude, and it's not only the occasion, but also the capacity for steeping oneself in the whole of creation." We probably know from experience that our concern with part of reality inhibits our capacity to be impacted by the totality. nor can we give unconditional concentration while we leave ourselves liable to diversion. As we hold our cell phones in our hands, we indicate that whatever else we do is subject to interruption. Our present task has only a temporary hold on our attention. Our concentration on it is conditional and thereby incomplete. We might go even further. Cell phone adhesion is an invitation to and an expectation of interruption. Perhaps we might ask ourselves whether we are in the process of being unable to commit ourselves unconditionally to anything when we leave the door open to a whole universe of alternatives. However, it's only by being willing to move from disparate parts towards the totality that we introduce a note of seriousness into our lives. It's by stepping back from the multiplicity of our occupations and preoccupations that we create a receptivity to what may well transcend the limits imposed by our habitual hopes and expectations, and perhaps also our prejudices. Most of us cannot do this all the time, but we can make a choice to do it sometimes. Although Thomas Merton was speaking about the institutionalized contemplative life, what he says applies also to the contemplative component of any human life in its integrity. Quotation. A contemplative life must provide an area, a space of liberty, of silence, in which possibilities are allowed to surface and new choices, beyond routine choices, become manifest. It should create a new experience of time, not as a stopgap, stillness, but as temps vierge, not as a blank to be filled or an untouched space to be conquered and violated, but a space which can enjoy its own potentialities and hopes, and its own presence to itself. One's own time, not dominated by one's own ego and its demands. He's speaking of a space from which the ego is excluded. There are two great obstacles to creating a leisurely space in which study that is assiduous, vehement, and pleasurable is likely to occur. On the one hand, acedia, on the other hand, multitasking. The Israeli sociologist Shlomo Shoham has suggested that acedia is the dominant characteristic of contemporary Western society. That was in 1972, before the internet, cell phones, and social media. Acedia can be recognized in a person's willful detachment from serious social engagement in favor of some form of entertainment. It's almost a choice of non-existence. A parallel but opposite form of disengagement is multitasking. By attempting several tasks simultaneously, none is likely to absorb our entire attention. Any one task can be neglected on the pretext of attending to something else. Both distraction and hyperoccupation preempt the wholehearted attention that genuine study requires, since such study involves yoking together the two hemispheres of the brain, so that rational thought and intuition sing together in harmony. The kind of study that is assiduous, vehement, and pleasurable demands that left and right hemisphere operate in tandem. It involves the willing application of our whole heart and mind. If you Google study and ask for images, You get a whole lot of pictures of people interacting with books and computers. This is certainly part of study, but there is another part, when the book is closed and the computer switched off. The leisure which allows data collected in active research to be processed is essential for creative outcomes. Just as the body left to itself will heal the wounds it has suffered, so the mind, when it is given some free time, will often go off in search of answers to the questions that have been left hanging when active study ceased. Some surely have experienced this. When asked where he obtained the content for his books, the American novelist Don DeLillo answered, "It comes out of all the time the writer wastes." The image of Archimedes in his bath comes to mind. Perhaps we should consider spending more time in the bath. Because of the evolutionary stance that we in the last couple of centuries like to give everything, we tend to believe that every important process should proceed logically and without undue interruption. The life and development of the mind, however, is more than a regimented march through a sequence of prescribed stages. It feeds off contingent and circumstantial components. These may include detours and sidetracks, where what is hidden on the highway bursts into sight. At the time, this may seem to be a distraction or a delay to real progress, but in fact, it can be an enrichment. Development is recognized as such only in retrospect. Often enough, the most desirable and dramatic developments are the result of dangerous thinking outside the box. This is unlikely to happen in a closed regime of the mind when the spirit of leisure is lacking. By random study, I do not mean an uncommitted fluttering through an ever-changing variety of superficial interests. Such an activity scarcely merits the description assiduous. Nor am I underestimating the necessary contribution made by sustained and close reading of primary sources and the careful consideration of what others think about them. Such application is indispensable to our growth in knowledge, but sometimes intense concentration can cause us to lose sight of what is on the periphery, and this can result in our vision of the whole being incomplete. Insight is not necessarily linked to the degree of labor invested in research, but often opens up before us unbidden. The opposite is also true. Sometimes exclusive concentration and energetic application have the effect of limiting us to our previous purview. Specialist research that consists only in drilling deeper and deeper into a particular topic pursues its goal by casting away everything that is deemed irrelevant. As a result, we find ourselves blocked in our progress by the solid wall of our prejudgments. By way of illustration, let me draw on my own experience. When I was doing the spade work for my thesis on the desire of God in the writings of Bernard of Clairvaux, this was in the 1970s BC, before computers. I trawled through the whole 9 volumes of his works, noting every single occurrence of the word and the theme and of an ever-expanding range of association. The result was hundreds, if not thousands, of index cards. My work was certainly assiduous and perhaps vehement, though not always pleasurable. But I suppose it yielded an acceptable result. However, reading St. Bernard's writings in the decades since then, in a more leisurely context, I'm frequently surprised to notice highly significant texts that completely escaped my attention during my relentless charge to capture relevant data. I've since become aware that the full picture of his most important themes is never contained in a single work, but invariably scattered throughout his whole corpus, and often flagged informally, sometimes with an imaginative variation in vocabulary that defies the efforts of those whose work is guided by computerized concordances. Incidental nuances are often added in unexpected places. Furthermore, I regularly come across interesting details that would probably feed into a biography if one were daring enough to embark on such a project. For example, his vivid description of the behavior of a man on the point of drowning is obviously based on observation. And this leads me to ask whether taking advantage of climate change during the warm medieval period, Bernard could ever have been a swimmer. However, I'm not sure how acceptable to his pious hagiographers would be the picture of a youthful Bernard cavorting naked with his friends in the river Seine during his years at Châtillon. We'll never know for certain. But even so, I do not consider that this hypothesis can be dismissively set aside. In random study, interesting data sometimes pop up unexpectedly. The point I'm making is that often we see more when we're not looking for something in particular, just as we see more when we are a passenger in the car and not driving. We have the luxury of looking around. Control is achieved by systematic limitation. We decide in advance what we are looking for, and as a result, that's about all we see. I suppose it's partly a matter of temperament, but I must admit I would rather wander aimlessly around a strange city and see 3 interesting things than to be marched around by an accredited guide and dutifully forced to register 33 officially recognized sites that absolutely must be viewed. There's something, moreover, something luxurious about taking up a project that has absolutely nothing to do with our everyday commitments. To read a thick volume on the life of Frederick Barbarossa or some other notable of history, for most of us has little utilitarian benefit. Yet spending such an amount of time wandering in a previously unknown area cannot be without some impact on who we are and how we look at things. A little irrelevance can add a sparkle to life. Hearing Peter Wohleben's book, The Hidden Life of Trees, read in the monastic refectory, opened up for me a whole new world of understanding that was more delightful than useful. After that, my world is brighter. I look at trees with a deeper degree of admiration. In his work on the idea of a university, Cardinal Newman opposed the utilitarian thesis propounded by John Locke on the ground that what is useful today might well be useless tomorrow. There is something in random study that goes beyond success at examination or winning the approval of academic peers. I'm thinking of study as a means of enhancing one's life, increasing one's happiness, and sowing the seeds from which wisdom sprouts. It can be a means by which the mysteries of the universe are laid bare drift before our wandering and wondering gaze. Let me go further. I'm suggesting that this kind of gratuitous study may well merit listing among the tools of the spiritual craft. One of the many great contributions of Father Jean Leclerc of this university was his promotion of what he termed monastic theology, notably, of course, in his book, The Love of Learning and the Desire for God. The meaning of the term itself was not self-evident, and there were some grumpy reactions to it. It did not signal any desire to ignore or marginalize the work of more scholastic theologians. It indicated not a replacement, but a complement to rigorous dogmatic investigation. As he was to write, perhaps by way of retractatio, our appreciation for monastic theology should in no sense lessen the esteem which is due that form of theology which developed after the monastic period. Some thought that the term referred to a theological interpretation of monasticism, such as was surveyed in the well-received collective volume Théologie de la vie monastique. However, its specific focus was not so much on content, but more on the method and spirit of theologizing. It sought to inject a subjective component into theological reflection to compensate for its wealth of objective abstractions. Its ambition was not to expand the universe of theological understanding, but to facilitate its translation into self-awareness, prayer, and practice. It applied itself to the same mysteries, but expressed its conclusion using different literary genres and employing a distinctive semantic palette, with certain terms supercharged to facilitate its particular purpose. Its most typical forms were sermons and homilies, rather than the Aristotelian tractates then coming into favor in the schools. And, as we all know, sermons are inclined to wander. Indicative of the specificity of monastic theology was its greater reliance on the right hemisphere of the brain. It did not spell out everything in precise analytic detail, but approached its subject holistically and circuitously. Similes and metaphors abound. Scripture is invoked imaginatively, often making surprising linkages and combining texts. Wordplay is paramount, and smiles are not excluded. In monastic theology, intuition is king, and poetic discourse its consort. Western monastic theology drew its energy from tradition. As it was practiced before the advent of scholasticism, it very clearly stood on the shoulders of predecessors, the Latin Church Fathers and others who had been translated into Latin in the course of the centuries, and particularly those who had served as readings in the office of vigils. This kind of monastic study was considerably more than the synthesizing of pre-existing texts, such as was done by some medieval plagiarists. It demanded an interchange with the text being studied, not merely to establish what might have been its meaning for the writer when first written, but what was its meaning for the contemporary reading. This meant that the written text entered into dialogue with the author's experience, past history, together with present concerns and needs. The ancient text continued to flex its muscles and enter into contest with contemporary priorities. Monastic theology emerged in the context of a dialogue with tradition. It was a corporate or collective approach with a certain amount of give and take, rather than a laser-focused pursuit of a definitive answer to particular questions. It enjoyed being a search after truth without aspiring to arrive at the kind of discovery that would cause the search to end. It was the kind of corkscrew engagement described by Pseudo-Dionysius, going round and round its object, penetrating deeper and deeper, but delighting never to arrive at a terminus ad quem. What was found was that there is yet more to be found, and that therefore more to be searched for. Any particular instance of monastic theology can only be appreciated in the context of an ongoing tradition, not just as an inactive passenger in a train traveling through the centuries, but as an active participant in the evolution of the original gift, continually drawing the new into the old, so that in the sense the two become inseparable. I suppose this raises the question of whether the style of theologizing practiced in medieval monasteries, and no doubt somewhat determined by the relative paucity of scholarly resources, can have a relevance today. Would there be any usefulness in it? Yes, I think that finding a way to reproduce the process in contemporary terms can serve to enhance the life of individuals who are seeking to incorporate the scriptures and the wisdom of the Church Fathers into their own emergent philosophy of life. Time invested in the pursuit of wisdom is never time wasted. Spending time wondering and wandering through the ancient texts is certainly mind-expanding and life-enhancing. But there is something else. Pope Francis has pointed out something of which most of us are aware. Throughout the Church, the area of homiletics is in urgent need of redemption. If preachers are to build bridges between the sacred texts and the lives of the people, it's not enough that they paraphrase biblical commentaries or rave on about their own particular moral predilections. They must themselves have acquired the art of living in the context of God's self-revelation, giving it permission to address their life situations, and being willing to be both challenged and comforted by it. Out of this encounter, homilies emerge. A life in which Lectio Divina is ruminatively pondered and practically integrated is more likely to find a style of preaching which speaks to the hearts of the faithful. Cardinal Newman notes that a general culture of mind is the best aid to professional and scientific study, and educated people can do what illiterate cannot. The heuristic method employed by monastic theology would probably be useful in scientific investigation. That's beyond my purview, but it excels when it comes to whatever may be loosely designated as philosophy. I'm speaking of that topic which has occupied many great thinkers during the centuries, the pursuit of wisdom. Knowledge is sharply defined, but well-rounded wisdom has no frontiers. Knowledge, however extensive, is incomplete. It needs broadening. Even as John Locke remarked, education begins the gentleman, but reading, good company, and reflection must finish him. In a certain sense, wisdom is both infinite and ever-expanding. This is because it needs to be reincarnated in every situation and in every generation. Wisdom can be appreciated in several different ways. It can be seen as a synthesis of the knowledge that we have acquired even outside our chosen fields of specialization. So it has a combinative element. Because it is infinitely hospitable rather than obsessively evaluative, wisdom is enriched through the assimilation of many different branches of knowledge and experience. As a result, it is both variegated and nuanced. And of course, this is a process that is not realized in a moment. It is protracted through many years and is in reality a lifelong pursuit. Wisdom is usually not solitary, it is social. We learn more in company with others. How often a wise person will say, "I had a great teacher." Human beings are societal animals, and we grow most when we are receptive of the distinctive gifts of others, not only sharing with our contemporaries, but drawing on the wisdom of ages past through our active intervention with wholesome tradition. In the best sense, wisdom is also traditional. In certain circumstances, random study can also be therapeutic. I remember a confrere who coped with the ravages of chemotherapy by immersing himself in the 5 volumes of Harold Macmillan's memoirs. A useless occupation, surely, but somehow it enabled him to hold on to his humanity. We can also appreciate that wisdom draws into itself years and years of human experience, so that it is characterized by a certain mellowness that makes it more acceptable than sharp-edged knowledge. Dare I say it, but about wisdom there is a certain sweetness, both to the one who possesses it and to all who encounter it. Random study is really a matter of the pursuit of wisdom. We cannot know in advance what we will find, and we're not fully able to explain what we are seeking. We are simply giving free course to the eros of the mind by indulging the detached and disinterested desire to know, seeking the things that are above. Because random study aims for ongoing openness rather than for a predefined conclusion, it operates at the level of common humanity and thereby generates a willing hospitality to new information. Random study promotes an ever-expanding universe of interest rather than compulsive concentration. Dimly aware of the limitless horizon that is the ultimate mystery, those who practice random study are not afraid to admit a limitation of their own knowledge, and because of this, they experience a willingness to engage in dialogue with those who think differently. Their wandering through the byways of reality and history gives points of connection with those coming from different directions. It becomes a little easier to find common ground and to build bridges that span the gulf between divergent opinions. In this way, encounter with difference leads beyond conflict to mutual enrichment. Useful study is useful. Useless study is often assiduous, vehement, and pleasurable. The hippocampus is vast in capacity and very hospitable. Its good health and operation depend in part on continual learning. Applying ourselves to an area outside the scope of our specialization often leads to the anxiety-free acquisition of new knowledge and perhaps the formation of new skills. Experience seems to indicate that the more we delve into a particular topic, the more vehement our interest becomes. What at first was no more than a slight twinge of curiosity becomes a passion to learn more. we're not so much interested in becoming a registered expert on the subject. We just enjoy immersing ourselves in a topic that has few intermediate linkages. If a fortuitous connection with our everyday world emerges, we gladly exploit it, though this was never the object of our study. Assiduous, vehement, pleasurable. May I be so bold as to assert that maybe the person who indulges in random study returns to more formal intellectual engagement, broadened and enriched. And maybe after many years of growing in wisdom, they end up being more fully human and thereby more fully divine. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this rich lecture. And I think we should practice now what on the other side of the river is being practiced quite a bit in the synodal process, that we just keep silent for a short time, collect the thoughts, and then engage in direct discussion. We kept 2 minutes silent, and I asked Cardinal Roach not to tell in the Vatican that we did not have the 3 minutes that are usually being practiced. It's a fairly long time, isn't it? 2 minutes to be silent in a group. That's an interesting experience, I think, that this synodal process makes clear to us. And this is actually also very monastic. Before opening up the floor for questions, comments, and then, of course, also a response, we hope. I want to say, while I've listened to this magnificent lecture, it became clear to me that the books I've read by Michael Casey are in some way a product of what he talked about. So I think we also understand hermeneutically, maybe, or even the key, why his writings are appreciated also in many translations. The joy of random study. So there's content, substance, but things happen. They are not forced. So I think also, yeah, in a hermeneutical way, this was very interesting for us, reading Michael Casey. And those who haven't read Michael Casey, I think, will now maybe also read him in a different perspective, because knowing someone, of course, you view his works in a different way. There is no scheme, no system now. I think just what comes to mind, what you want to share, what you want to ask, please take advantage of this. And there's a microphone, so it will come up to you. And then I ask Father Michael immediately to respond or to, yeah. Professor Bruckner is the chair for Christian thought and spiritual practice here at our university.
Thank you very much for this beautiful speech, and for opening up this horizon of another mode or another way of studying or of learning. Always when I'm thinking about this ancient idea of scholae, I'm always getting a little bit depressed about our actual system of of the university, but also in the schools. And so you pointed it out, not even or studying, even not the something not institutionalized, but even not something useful, but really something completely free, contingent, something which comes to me in a time of leisure, which is a really beautiful vision. So for me, only when I'm looking at our today's reality of how studying functions, very often I think so. What does it say about our actual status of the spirit, we can say, if indeed we do not, how could it be organized? Can it be organized? Can there be created spaces, also free shared spaces where we can learn with each other, study with each other? Because that's indeed also one of my personal experiences, that we call it Lesekreis in German, so a circle, reading circle of people, friends reading together a philosophical or theological text. It is one of the most beautiful spiritual experiences, I would say, or reading experiences, learning experiences, study experiences, which also creates very beautiful relationships, I would say. This reading and studying together without an immediate goal or purpose. Yeah, thank you. And so, but always when I'm thinking of my personal experience in school and then also at the universities, even in the theology, it's always getting more and more functionalized, we can say. Where is the space for except maybe in the monastery for such a type of studying?
Yeah, it's a little bit flash, isn't it? A bit of a luxury, especially when you have a kind of a purposeful education of people, which is useful and thereby significant in their lives. But this is something a little bit extra, which I think adds something. I had a supervisor at one stage who encouraged me in this. He said, you really ought to spend time doing something that has no practical effect. So that's when I started reading sort of serious books about topics that I knew nothing about, and learned a little. And the other example was Jean Leclerc, who used to go to the medieval congress at Kalamazoo, and he used to drive people crazy because they all hoped that he would turn up at topics on monastic theology or Bernard of Clairvaux or whatever. But he wasn't interested in that. He knew all about that. So he wandered around and listened to people talking about computerized concordances of Peter Abelard or something like that. He would listen all ears to very, very strange things, but it was all going in and all feeding this sense of a broader universe. And I suppose that's what you tell your students all the time is concentrate, concentrate, don't get distracted. And yet I'm saying perhaps the distractions that are more enriching. So I don't know how this is incorporated into a Teutonic education system, but I imagine that some sort of creative thought might be helpful.
A phrase that struck me, you said something like monasticism relies on intuition and poetry. I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I suppose it's this business of using the right brain, the non-dominative side of the brain, to get all the juice out of what has been formulated with great accuracy by the left side of the brain. And so my actual phrase was, if I can remember what I myself said, was that intuition is king and poetic discourse is its consort. The sense of I gave a talk at a theological forum in Australia at one stage, in which I said it seems scandalous to me that a theologian should write poetry. Point being, they should incorporate their poetry into their theology. If they really understood the beauty of the topic that they were talking about, their poetical instincts would find expression in their theological writings. What I didn't know at the time was that I had in the audience a very famous Tony Kelly, very famous Australian theologian who is also a poet and hymnographer. So we had a discussion on that latter. A little bit of exaggeration is no foreigner to monastic theology or this type of thing either. But its use is to make a point, to touch the emotions and to work through the emotions to the whole person, and in the process brings enlightenment to the mind. But it's an intuitive kind of thing that works on what has been brought up already and tries to season it with a little bit of poetry, huh?
Within the rule of Saint Benedict, there is a description of the types of monks, and one of them is a gyrovag. And gyrovags have had a bad rap over the centuries, and people are understanding that there might be some worth in that. And as you were speaking about random study, I was wondering how might we turn the pejorative perception of dilettantism into something worthwhile?
Well, of course, if you prefer French, it's amateur. And yes, amateur or dilettante means originally somebody who loves the subject that they're talking about. And that's why they engage with it. And so there's a very positive thing in looking at a topic or reading an author to which we're not professionally bound, to read it out of sheer enjoyment of what they have to say. I can see that when you talk of random study, some could see this as a kind of mental gyrovag of wandering around, but really there's nothing more productive than wandering. And twice in the talk I used the couplet, wandering and wondering. it's a very nice way to live. And there's something very human about it. And eventually, I think it produces good results. It's not to dismiss the value of systematic education, but it's to, in some way, complement it.
Thank you, Father Michael Casey. I have kind of a practical question. So I study philosophy, but I found a few years ago a really wonderful outlet reading literature and also take place in book clubs, which maybe is the American translation of Lesekreise. I don't know. But you talked about getting outside of your comfort zone and just, I'm asking, in your experience, would you say, for example, that I should read a book about like science or about quantum physics just to kind of get out of the comfort zone and experience a new way of knowing, even though that might not be really what appeals to me? Or should we more follow our own flow, or is that not taking us far enough out of our comfort zone? Thank you.
Well, I think we have to follow our nose. Is always a good plan. And is that there's always a suspicion that there's something, I don't understand it, but there's something in this for me. It's not just, quantum physics. I can impress any people that I meet by my knowledge of quantum physics and utterly confuse them. But something that really, I'd really like to understand this. Or you see a footnote in a book and you say, oh, yeah, I'd like to do that. It's more this heuristic method of following your nose, of allowing yourself to be led, understanding that the ultimate outcome is God. Huh? The Diadicus of Photicae, his little formula of following, using the spiritual sense to hunt down the one who is unseen. So you get the impression of sniffer dogs, pursuing the scent of the prey, but following this interior sense, this sense of the mind, hunting down the one that is unseen. It's not a bad definition of life, but it's at the service of this that our forays into unspecialized areas comes. We think that this has some information, some guidance, some relevance for me. And without that initial glimmer of inspiration, I think the actual just dipping into different subjects is just a matter of being a mental gyrovag.
Can we say that random study is a part of knowing ourselves and perhaps also accept our weaknesses in the sense that is a way to build a path to become fully human? Because I feel sometimes something is missing in terms of human maturity in our monastic formations. So perhaps we should experience that more in our novitiates.
I'd say yes, certainly the novitiate, but more especially later on. In the 1970s, a survey was done in the United States by Malachi Marion of all the Trappist monasteries in the United States, asking, was there anybody in any of the monasteries that studied who didn't have to teach or who wasn't a student? The total number was the only people who actually studied at that time were people who had to, either as students or as teachers or formators. And I think that's a grave impoverishment. And I think that perhaps it had more side effects in later years than people really suspected. But this idea of allowing oneself to grow in self-knowledge, it often comes in unexpected ways. I know a friend of mine was walking down the street, and she looked in the shop window and saw this old lady. And then a couple of steps later, she suddenly realized that the old lady was herself. So then she decided to get her hip operation. But sometimes it's unexpected things that give us a glimmer into self-knowledge, because in the ordinary things, we've built walls against growing in self-knowledge because it's too challenging.
Of course, you can also ask a question, for instance, in Italian. Si può anche parlare in italiano e io faccio traduzione.
Father, thank you for the term AC and BC. Earlier, when we were doing philosophy and theology, to get a word, we used to rush to the library and search the track of dictionary and follow. We take 1 hour or 2 hours to search a term. Today, in the computer world, are we going faster? Or if it is your computer is off, what will be the situations? Thank you.
I think some things are faster. I myself often have to check footnotes, which means going down to because I'm sloppy about the details of things. I have to take a walk down to the library to check it. That's 300 meters there and back. But I think it does good things for the brain to get up from the computer and go out the door. And I think when I go to the office, that all my best thoughts come when I close the computer and stand up. That the brain is working, and sometimes when we try to confine it to specific tasks, it doesn't operate as freely as it wants. So yeah, there are handy things about computers. You can check the date of a publication or something without having to go for a walkabout, but also just being generally rather benign about time. Where do your books come from? I quoted Don DeLillo. It comes from all the time a writer wastes. That's why I suggested spending more time in the bath. Just allowing things to come to the surface.
I would like to ask you something.
You have to.
Your presentation was brilliant and appreciated a lot. The question is this, all of us aspire to be, let's say, somebody like you in the field of writing. If you ask everyone individually, they would agree with that. But then my question is, have you always been so good like this in writing or researching? Or have you had your moments of struggle? How you began? Was it difficult or easy? How you matured? This is it.
Ask a doctoral student.
My first published work was at the age of 8 years old. It was a joke I sent into the children's page of the local newspaper. But I'll tell you a secret, that it was a joke that I stole from the children's page of another newspaper and simply changed the name. And I got 5 shillings for that. So it was a little prize. My grandfather was a poet. I think I have writing genes. And so if you want to be a writer, not only learn how to waste time, but choose your parents wisely. It doesn't have to be a torment or a toil, but for some people, and I must admit, it comes fairly easily. But I recognize that for other people, it's a pain. A lot depends on our genetic makeup, I think.
For the presentation.
Thank you for your presentation and for having wandered through Rome with me last week. So my question is, on the one side, it's an advantage to study randomly, obviously, but what are possible risks, or where are the problems, or how could one lose oneself, or get lost, or how is it maybe become even a vice and not an advantage or a positive thing, especially in the context of a monastic community?
I think it's a supplement to more formal study, and you need one of the things that random study, it raises new interests, new topics to query, and these had to be investigated somewhat systematically, because we won't find any solution if we don't look in the right places. So I see it as Jean Leclerc saw monastic theology as complementing more rigorous work, and the two coming together and feeding on each other. I don't think it's possible to simply engage in random study. And so because I'm speaking to people who are students and teachers, I rave on about the values of random study. If I was speaking to a lot of people, I'd rave on about the value of being systematic in our approach to things, and dedicating ourselves to making real progress in knowledge and understanding. So it's complementary, not a substitute.
Students of the liturgy, the professors, I should read a book about how to handle microphones.
It's my next book.
So thank you very much, Father Michael, for your lecture. And when I was reflecting about your lecture, it was nearly a bit the same like with Isabella. I was a bit sad. What about the joy of random study in a university like this, where I see that the students have to do so many things on a functional basis in a short time? And where is this space for this joy? I must say, I have to confess, like many of my German colleagues, we are not friends so much of the Bologna process, because we have lost quite a lot of possibilities because of this process. But then it came to my mind, my own experience here at Sant'Anselmo and the experience of many of my students. When they have to write a thesis, it starts in a functional way. They have to write it and they have to hand it in a certain time. But then when we hand it in and read what we have written in the time, we experience there's much more. There's not only the functional thing. In this process of writing a thesis, there enters also the joy of random study. At the end, there are things that we simply received joyfully. It entered. And so this is a kind of consolation for me. Even if I'm always sad when I hear my students, how many exams they have to prepare at the end of a semester and so on. I ask myself, where is the space for the joy of study? But there is some space, I think, fortunately.
Well, I suppose
may I invite you for a concluding remark? So then we finish it.
I'll just say, I suppose most of your students outlive the study, which means they go on to live. But if their study has been fruitful, it's something that stays with them during life and becomes something of a companion to life. Okay.
Companion to life. Thank you very much to all of you for coming, for participating. And I saw very interested faces, people who really thought along and were enriched by this lecture and the discussion now. We thank you very much, Father Michael Casey, to be here in Rome, really on the other side of the globe, to share your experience and your scholarly work with us. And we wish you all the best for everything you do. You are traveling widely and you are really enriching monasticism and beyond. The bell is the sign. We have Mass. Don't have Vespers today. We have the Eucharist in African liturgy at 7 o'clock in the church. You're welcome for this. And I want to, to show you this booklet. It was made out of the honorary degree where Father Michael Casey gave a magisterial lecture on the rule and the tradition, a personal journey, where he also gets very personal. And our General Secretary has compiled this in a nice booklet that you can take home or also give to other people. And then Forum Sant'Anselmo continues on the 22nd of May in Italian, Immaginare Maria, un dialogo tra arte e teologia. You can also take these leaflets and also distribute it to other people. Forum Sant'Anselmo is open to anyone. And so thank you very much and have a good evening. And thank you again, Father Michael.